first life. Then he suddenly looked closely at the dial of his wristwatch, which looked a little strange for such an object. The guy quickly explained that it was a progress watch that showed his level growth and that Sophia had recently given it to him for his birthday. However, if he now has to face the geniuses of the academy, the strength he has received will not be enough, which means it's time to remember the Hall of Heroic Souls. Since the invasion of the monsters, the hall began to absorb the desires and feelings of people, and Henry wanted to find out everything about this place. But if the hall was just a sacred relic with myths of the past, then the immortal spirit is not real, but an illusion created by this hall, right? He was most likely right, but Henry reminded him that the relic contained the souls of real people from the past, and the spirit appeared when the guy needed his help. Perhaps the immortal spirit after death could not rest because of the unfinished business, and by helping Henry, wanted to complete it. Suddenly, Henry's teacher appeared right there, having come running right after that terrible storm had ended. Julia was with her, and both girls did not understand how the terrible energy fluctuations that had frightened everyone a minute ago had disappeared so quickly. Michelle then commanded everyone to run and find that incredible student who was talented enough to summon these powers. Fortunately, Henry's primordial chaos technique was able to hide the owner's energy, and now he could disguise himself and remain unnoticed. The day was already drawing to a close, and the sudden surge of energy had completely died down, leaving only the memories of those who had seen this miracle with their own eyes. The spirit warned that Henry's teacher, Michelle, who was in the park near the academy today, was giving off a truly sinister aura. One could attribute this to Michelle's strictness as a teacher, but the immortal spirit felt that there was another explanation. The rage of this woman seemed to carry within itself the death of at least 1,000 lives, and it is unlikely that a simple teacher possessed such energy. On the way, Henry changed the subject, telling them that when he was 6 years old, he was often bullied by other orphans, and he still remembers it. And then one day, after escaping and wandering for a long time, he almost died. But at that moment, Sophia came to his aid and took him to her home. Suddenly, looking at the door of Henry's house, which they were approaching, the spirit realized that there were uninvited guests next to it. Indeed, Sophia and Julia were standing near the entrance, but it was unclear why they were together and what they were talking about. Fortunately, by this time, the guy had already managed to restore his acute hearing and tried to understand what they were chatting about. It turned out that Julia was convincing Sophia not to consider Henry better than her, and not to forget their real true love. In response to this, Sophia asked her to calm down and not make loud scenes right next to her house, but she continued to insist that true love was more important than people's prejudices. And she was hurt to hear how Sophia accepted Henry's confession. But the girl had hinted to Julia before that nothing could happen between them, and carefully removed her hand from her embrace, not giving false hope. Besides, Julia was the chair of the disciplinary committee, and if the details of their relationship had come to light, she would definitely have been in trouble. Yes, it seemed that their conversation could not be understood otherwise, and both of them were shocked by what they had accidentally learned about these girls. It seemed that the list of Henry's rivals in the fight for Sophia had been expanded to include a female name, since Julia's words could not have been understood otherwise. Finally, Sophia asked Julia to behave more restrainedly, because recently she had a boyfriend and her life had changed a lot. Of course, these two girls looked very beautiful together, and the immortal spirit hinted to the guy that it would be more fun to live with two friends. But right now, the guy was in no mood for jokes, because since the moment of rebirth, he entered a room for the first time, where he had not been for many years. Everything in Henry's room remained the same as it was stored in his memory, and even the table that he and his father found at the flea market was still in place. And Sophia herself begged her father to buy her the game console on the top shelf, having made it to the list of the best students, and later gave this console to Henry. And then, picking up his childhood toy, Henry remembered that for some reason his mother did not allow him to throw them away, telling him to keep them as a keepsake. At that very moment, the door of his room suddenly opened, and his parents appeared in the doorway. Turning sharply in their direction, he saw their happy faces again, and could not believe that he had finally met them again. But this time, they did not come empty-handed, because his father was holding a bundle in his hands, and in this bundle were all their savings. His parents knew that Henry had always wanted to study at a fee-paying cultivation department like Sophia, but they hadn't had the money to pay for the course before. But they could only take this money from savings that they had been putting aside for a long time for an operation for their father, who had had a bad heart all his life. In his past life, this amount allowed Henry to enter the cultivator faculty, but his father hid the progress of the disease and died a year later. The father suddenly began to speak in the same words as in his past life, convincing his son that he was fine and did not need an operation. But this time, Henry would not agree to take the money under any circumstances, asking his parents to forget this idea and just trust him. Without even listening to their protests, the guy hurried to close the door behind him, knowing that they would begin to persuade him to accept money for tuition. The immortal spirit couldn't understand why he didn't immediately tell his parents that he had already completed the first level and didn't need cultivator training. But Henry didn't want to shock his parents with this news, and right now he was determined to quickly find the necessary amount for his father's treatment. The spirit knew that this man simply had frequent heart attacks, and a little healing elixir would be enough to help him. Although nowadays a talented alchemist was a rarity, because this art was forgotten, and the recipes for potions were kept only by the last remaining masters. Of course, it was possible to obtain knowledge on one's own, but even the weakest spiritual pill that awakened it in a person cost a lot of money. At this moment, looking at the immortal spirit, Henry suddenly realized that he was seeing the creator of alchemy himself in front of him. The boy joyfully exclaimed that with an assistant like him, Henry would quickly find out all the secret information. But instead of helping, the spirit suddenly discovered 2 glossy men's magazines that had been kept under Henry's bed all this time. At the last moment, the guy loudly asked not to open these magazines, because he remembered very well what illustrations were on their pages. But, unfortunately, it was too late, and the spirit opened all these magazines, awakening in Henry those teenage feelings from such pictures. Unfortunately, it was at that moment that Sophia entered the guy's room, not understanding why he was refusing money for his education. But instead of a serious conversation, she suddenly saw Henry, frozen with his pants down, looking at her with horror. The girl then quickly ran out into the corridor and slammed the door loudly, apologizing for this intrusion at an inopportune moment. Of course, he still tried to shout after her that she had misunderstood everything, but it seemed it was too late to explain. After some time, the guy still managed to persuade Sophia to return to his room so that they could talk about everything. The girl saw how ashamed her friend was in front of her, although Sophia herself felt a little awkward about this scene. And at that moment the immortal spirit was reading to the young people a tale about a man who stole a pair of roots for a woman from a holy temple and was cruelly punished for it. He reread this story with such delight, completely forgetting that the young people were not at all up to his stupid tales right now. Finally, the girl was the first to break their silence and asked the guy to tell her everything he had for her. Realizing that there would be no other chance, Henry honestly admitted that he did not expect from Julia the confession to Sophia that he heard at the door. But, of course, Sophia responded by saying that the guy had simply misunderstood her and that everything was completely different. Seeing that Henry did not believe her, Sophia stated in a serious tone that there was no and could not be a relationship between them, because she had always only liked boys. And then, gently taking Henry's hand, she thanked him for the brave words he had spoken in front of the entire class a few days ago. It seemed that only now Henry realized that Sophia was not against such confessions and was ready to officially become his girlfriend, without being embarrassed in public. Then she changed the subject a little, saying that Charlie had long deserved a good spanking, and she was glad that he had gotten it badly that day. She couldn't understand why such a simple solution to the problems that had long been brewing had never occurred to her before. From now on, she wanted to consider Henry her boyfriend, no longer ask herself unnecessary questions, but simply live and continue her studies at the faculty, continuing to read the collection of ancient tales. The immortal spirit suddenly came across a tale about himself, and realized that people had composed a lot of nonsense. He could not understand who could come up with these stupid tales, which never existed in his lifetime and simply could not exist. The young people, not listening to him, continued to discuss funny incidents from the past when they behaved like children and did not dare to take this step. At some point, the girl even became worried about Henry, because he was so carried away by funny memories that he began to look like a real psycho. And he, without letting up, assured his friend that he has such moments, and Sophia will have to get used to his stupidity if she wants to be his girlfriend. Then he solemnly placed his hand on his chest, ready to take the oath he should have told Sophia in her first life. He promised her that she would never be ashamed of him. Sophia would not have to blush in front of others, but on the contrary, she would be proud of him. Realizing that she had stayed too long in Henry's room, the girl hurried to her own, because the next morning she had to get up early for school. After closing the door, she thought for a while whether she had done the right thing by telling Henry the whole truth and taking his confession to heart. Then she realized with a smile that all this time she had been worrying in vain about unnecessary thoughts, and it became a little offensive that she realized this only now. Then she even lightly patted herself on the cheeks to come to her senses and return to reality from the dream world that she herself had invented. But Henry still couldn't calm down, so instead of lightly slapping himself on the cheeks, he hit himself with his fist, and it was unclear what he could bring himself to. He even fell to the floor from the blow, but with a smile he realized that this was the only way he could finally calm down and come to his senses. Then, turning sharply towards the immortal spirit, the boy shouted loudly that tomorrow he would be obliged to go with him to a certain place. It was unclear what the guy was planning, but for some reason, Henry decided that he wanted to get rich quickly, so that one day he could just enjoy life and do nothing. However, this goal was still far away, and the next day he had one important task to do. It turned out that he wanted to personally come to the elixir pharmacy, which was run by a famous family, because only there could he find the necessary plant for the potion. The guy was happy about the help from the founder of alchemy, but the immortal spirit himself was not happy that he decided to profit from his talent. However, the guard, seeing the guy from afar, warned that this was the place of an influential family and that ordinary people were strictly prohibited from entering here. With the help of the watch, the guy immediately determined the level of the guard, realizing that he could easily deal with him. He suddenly approached Henry and warned that there would be no second chance to leave here. He grabbed the guy by the collar so abruptly that everyone around was prepared to see a fight and wanted to watch this spectacle. Maybe in his past life Henry would have tolerated this kind of treatment. But this time he will prove that he is not a mere mortal. And just a second later, with a deft move, he threw the guard so that he flew into the air and fell down. But even when the guard was in the air, the guy did not stop and rushed towards him to complete the move. He then slammed the security guard into the asphalt of the pharmacy parking lot with such force that the guard's body went through him, and small stones flew around. Passers-by who saw it with their own eyes couldn't understand how the guy defeated the 4th-level guard without magic. Of course, the girl could not calmly look at the young man who was stronger than everyone she had seen in her life. Looking at the defeated guard, the guy hoped that now this idiot would not stop him and throw him out like a vagabond. Quickly standing up, the guard apologized for his behavior and thanked Henry for not finishing him off and for sparing his life. Soon he found himself inside the very same pharmacy where magical elixirs and plants for their preparation were sold. From all sides, sellers shouted, assuring that their potions were the highest quality and that such low prices could not be found anywhere else. However, from experience, the spirit understood that all these goods were of low quality, and in the past, he would never have bought them for his potions. And Henry had already found the plant that would allow him to prepare the elixir and cure his father as soon as possible, before it was too late. The seller praised the product, saying that the elixir gave almost a 30% guarantee of healing, and the spirit did not understand how he could be proud of that. And the man assured the boy that if he bought the rhizome now and found an alchemist, the finished potion would cost more than the cost of it. It was a shame that these people weren't responsible for the quality of the goods. But right now, Henry had no choice. In the end, the guy agreed to take the goods, and the seller was pleased that he managed to pull off a great deal today. Of course, the seller began to praise the guy for his choice, but Henry said that he had forgotten the money at home and would bring it tomorrow morning. Yes, the man clearly didn't like such jokes, and he warned that non-payment would threaten Henry with serious consequences. Realizing that Henry was not giving up the rhizome and not paying, he shouted so loudly across the room that his scream could be heard at the other end of the huge pharmacy. A man who knew how to quickly solve such problems immediately responded to the call, and now he looked closely at the boy who dared to break the law. This man, Ralph, hated nothing more than puppies who were troublemakers and wanted to steal the goods without paying a penny. The wristwatch immediately informed Henry that he was facing a serious opponent, whose level had long exceeded the strength of any student at the academy. But the seller insisted that the boy took the box with the rhizome and was going to leave the pharmacy without paying for the goods. But Henry didn't run away, but looked Ralph in the eye with a challenge, and declared that a fighter like him would not be a problem for him. The guy didn't want to talk to a pathetic level 18 fighter and ordered the head of the family to be called here for a serious conversation. These words made the potion seller almost climb the wall, because it was the first time he'd heard such bold speeches from the young man. But Ralph had met such upstarts and replied that Henry's status did not allow him to meet the owner, so they would have to continue the conversation. But the guy revealed his cards and declared that he was the second best alchemist in the city, and that there was no one to compete with him except the master of their clan. For a moment there was a pause in the pharmacy, and everyone tried to figure out whether the guy was joking or telling the truth. But a second later, everyone burst into laughter, because this brat imagined himself to be the best alchemist in the city, although he looked like a dropout. Even the seller, who didn't know the intricacies of alchemy, reminded him that to make such statements one had to be a cultivator, and the guy didn't even have money for a potion. After all, Only after reaching the level of a master can you fully conjure and create the potions that are sold in this pharmacy. Ralph also saw Henry as a dim-witted student, incapable of knowing alchemy to the point of competing with the head pharmacist of their network of magical pharmacies. But the eyes do not always see the truth, and Ralph should have remembered this before making hurtful remarks. To prove his words in practice, the guy was ready to use this plant, creating a potion and demonstrating the power of a master of alchemy. Now it was time to play big, and with the help of the immortal spirit, the founder of alchemy, Henry, with fury in his eyes, wanted to fulfill his promise. Modern alchemists for some reason used a pottery kiln, an ordinary spiritual fire, trying to create what the spirit could do without these simple tools. After all, the sky itself was the fire that gave energy to the plant, and the earth served as the hearth where the magic potion would be brewed. Then the plant, which had been a rhizome just a second ago, flashed with a bright white light, and it became clear that the guy had not been joking all this time. At one point, Ralph even thought that there was going to be an explosion in the pharmacy. His face was covered in sweat, but there was nowhere to run. And Henry continued to use his energy along with the experience that his faithful assistant gave him. At some point, looking at the guy, the seller realized that a magic core had appeared in his hands, which meant that the guy was a real master. He did it the first time, and no one present could believe their eyes. Ralph was forced to admit that even the most experienced mage in their organization would not have achieved the complete treatment that Henry had just done. Then, grabbing the guy by the hand, he declared that this was a pathetic trick, because what the young underachiever had shown had never been accomplished by any magician in the entire history. In response, Henry handed him a clot of magic in the form of a ball, which was now worth no less than 2 million, and it was already impossible not to believe it. Then Henry said that he knew how quickly the effect of the potions from this pharmacy weakened, and it became clear that he was not an ordinary student and only wanted to appear as such. The guy explained that their cooking method was incorrect, and then briefly explained the most important details of the process. Having heard the advice, the man was happy that the young man had solved his problem, because now he knew how to fix the work so that the elixirs did not lose their properties. Henry hoped that now Ralph would believe him, and that this evidence would be enough to finally hold a meeting with the owner of the pharmacy. Of course, everyone agreed with the guy, and Ralph admitted his mistake. And Henry really was worthy of speaking only with their leader. Ralph's clan had to establish contact with the guy at any cost, so he certainly wouldn't quarrel over some unpaid purchase. Turning sharply to his assistant, he ordered that the man whom this young gentleman was waiting to meet be brought immediately. It turned out that there was no need to run and look for someone, because the right person was already on the premises of the pharmacy. It turned out that it was a young girl who saw everything with her own eyes, and already understood who she would have to deal with. Ralph immediately apologized to her for the insults he had made towards Henry a couple of minutes ago, and which he now regretted. But for Catherine, as this young lady was called, what was more important now was a conversation with one of the most powerful magicians in her life. When she approached, the wristwatch immediately reported that the girl's combat power was so high that it was difficult to even determine. Finally, the wily girl who ran the city's black markets, and Henry knew from her past life, appeared. He understood what their meeting would lead to, and was well aware of the offer she had prepared for him. Henry introduced himself as a simple student at the Magic Academy, but added that his alchemy master was so demanding that he was not ready to reveal the name of his mentor. Catherine did not expect to hear such an arrogant statement from the young man, who behaved arrogantly not only with the sellers, but also with her. Henry's behavior showed him in all his glory, but after all the insults he had endured, it was forgivable that he should show a little character. From the outside, it sounded like the words of an arrogant teenager, but the seller immediately noted the confidence the young man showed. The roles seemed to have changed, as Ralph had to restrain his mistress from attacking the student with her fists. No one would believe it if you told Henry that his patron in a past life was an empress, so they will find out later, when the time comes. It didn't matter, because Henry had already proven his skills in action, and Catherine had apologized again for today's incident. However, an apology alone was not enough, because in order to make amends, Catherine needed to do something very important. After this, the guy held out a magic ball made from the rhizome, and asked her to pay for the cost of the plant, instead of him. Even Ralph didn't expect such impudence, and now the other guards had to hold him back because he hated it when people took advantage of the lady's kindness. However, the girl was ready to pay for the plant herself instead of Henry, and the seller of the rhizome was glad that he would not leave empty-handed today. Of course, she was always glad to see outstanding alchemists, since she had recently taken over her father's business, and was ready to offer a deal to this young man. She sometimes asked to create elixirs for their pharmacy, and in return promised a bonus twice the market price. The boy easily agreed, although the immortal spirit was not used to spending his alchemical talent on earning this dirty money. Consent was given, and Catherine handed over the golden card to seal their union and connection with this young talent. There were 10 million on the card, and the girl said that it was her little gift to Henry as a sign of acquaintance. And although the spirit immediately began to dissuade him from the dubious deal, Henry had already decided that such offers were not to be refused. But then he reassured his assistant by saying that his plan was more cunning than Catherine thought. Suddenly the girl apologized, saying that a sage like Henry hardly needed pennies, and put the gold card in her pocket. But the next moment, Henry deftly grabbed her gold card and said that he would humbly accept the gift, not wanting to spoil their relationship with a refusal. Yes, it was a clever trick by the young man, and there was no denying that the guy's grip was truly admirable. Since everything had ended well, Ralph happily hurried to try out the new method of preparing the potion that the young student had told him about. Henry only forgot to say that the method is effective, but the person will feel sick for 5 days after preparing the potion. Of course, he didn't just take the card, and, as a sign of gratitude, he snapped his fingers and prepared to show a little trick. The next second, the ingredients for the potions he needed now to prepare the elixirs soared into the air above the pharmacy. Looking at this, Catherine did not understand why the young master needed so many ingredients and what he was going to do with them. Only the spirit guessed that the guy was seriously planning to create those magic pills, the recipe for which they had recently discussed in Henry's room. True, the immortal spirit was in no hurry to fulfill the request of his ward, reminding him that this means could only be used with the permission of the higher gods. But it seems the guy had already made his decision a long time ago, and this time he did not listen to the spirit, but did everything as he had planned from the very beginning. Within a minute, the mixing of these ingredients into a magical elixir was completed, and a bright ball appeared before the eyes of everyone present. These budding magicians had never seen such elixirs before, and realized that Henry was the only one in the city who was capable of such a miracle. Even Catherine's father, famous for his alchemical talents, did not possess the ability that this very young boy had just demonstrated. Many companies would pay millions for such elixirs, but now this student gave Catherine's pharmacy a gift for almost nothing, not counting her gold card. Now he wanted to repay the debt, and as a gift he offered her to take this elixir, contained in a small bright ball. In addition, the guy explained that due to Catherine's lack of skill, the purification of her soul was slow, and this potion would speed up the process. She expected nothing less from such a sage, who only looked young, but had incredible strength. At first she didn't even want to take the gift, believing that she had done nothing to deserve such a generous gift. But Henry, without listening to her to the end, suddenly put a ball in her mouth, endowed with the power to solve her long-standing problem. Now Catherine could no longer get out of it, and she had to swallow the pill, although she understood that the elixir was worth more than all the money on her gold card. Gradually, she was supposed to feel an improvement in her triple spiritual principle, and the guy promised her an exit to the stage of soul purification in 3 days. Waving goodbye and heading towards the exit, he shouted that he would create other powerful elixirs for her, but not for free, and was waiting for orders. That same evening, Henry was at home and thinking about the events that happened to him in the pharmacy of magical potions. Now he was closely connected with Catherine by new business relations, realizing that without her influence, he would not do what he was born for a second time. Of course, the immortal spirit did not miss the chance to say that he found the girl fascinating, and advised the guy not to limit himself to just doing things with her. However, Henry's plans were only to seduce her step by step, giving her false hopes, because there was already another girl next to him, whom he could not betray. From his past life, he knew well that all people love with their ears, and a couple of words are enough to win anyone over. To stand up to Charlie and his father, who would definitely get in the way, he needed to get some serious support. By using the primordial chaos art that created the vortex at the academy, he discovered a lot, but he believed that he needed to continue the path of cultivation. Yet the immortal spirit reminded that Henry's speed of ascension through chaos was much faster than others, and certainly faster than any mage in this city. In addition, today in the pharmacy, the pillars from the Hall of Heroic Souls absorbed a lot of people's emotions, especially when the guard was on the verge of death. Very soon this pillar will be filled, and then another soul of God will be called to Earth. With her help, Henry vowed to himself to protect the city from the next mutant attack. He will never forget that terrible day when he ran through a crowd of frightened people, trying to find his loved ones in it. The giant monster incinerated buildings one after another, and all the unfortunate people inside burned alive. At that moment, the girl he met first after his second birth suddenly appeared next to him. It was Julia, and she immediately blocked his path, telling him that he shouldn't fight the mutant alone. And although the girl herself was also scared, she did not show it and tried to appear confident. However, the main loss for Henry had already happened, and in his hands he tightly clutched the head of a girl living out her last minutes. But to his horror, he heard her confess that nothing would have changed if Henry had real magical abilities. Moreover, she stated that he had been too soft all his life, and that was why he had lost this mortal battle. After all, even if he received the throne after their wedding, he would not have been able to fix anything, and the mutant would have killed all these unfortunate people. And now, looking at the mountain of dead bodies, the guy prayed only for a chance to fix everything and turn back time. Suddenly opening his eyes, Henry realized that this was his next nightmare, and for the first few seconds he couldn't come to his senses. Sitting up abruptly in bed, he realized that the nightmares kept coming back, although the immortal spirit, as usual, was worried about something else. The same dream about his past returned to his memory, and his previous life did not give the guy peace even after his rebirth. All those pictures seemed to be imprinted in his memory, and now became nightmares that tormented him. But suddenly, he realized that with the help of the powerful artifacts that came so easily to him, he could change not only his own destiny, but that of all humanity. Then he suddenly realized that he had been hearing screams from behind the door for several minutes, and only now realized that someone needed his help. Quickly throwing on his shirt, he ran down the stairs towards the approaching screams coming from below. Bursting into the room, he wanted to understand why there was so much noise here, and what new trouble had happened to his family. But right at the door, his mother immediately asked Henry not to interfere and to return to his room. It turned out that several guys from an influential clan had been here for a long time, and they found it funny to look at this strange loser who decided to stop them. And their leader convinced Sophia that her father owed their clan a large sum of money, taken for treatment, and was now obliged to repay the debt with interest. But Dorothy did not understand how 50,000 in debt could suddenly become 200,000.